Hey there, night owl. Welcome aboard, or maybe you are just stuck awake, looking for something less stressful than doom scrolling. You picked a good one. Tonight's story is not exactly relaxing, but it is proof that the past was much weirder, dirtier, and possibly smellier than your current situation. If you like this sort of unexpectedly odd bedtime history, you know what to do. Go ahead and hit the buttons people always mention. Drop your local time and city in the comments too. I am always amused seeing someone say they are listening from a mountain village at 3 in the morning. Now, get the lights low, grab whatever feels cozy, tea, water, questionable snack, and settle in. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up, but it is not quite the gentle, Instagram-worthy morning you might hope for. Instead, your eyelids twitch open to a world that looks washed in an odd shade of gray. That is not just the dreary paint job. It is actual soot, dusted across the warped window panes and, more inconveniently, sprinkled over your pillow like it is a decorative finish. If you inhale, the air has bite, a raw, smoky flavor, seasoned with last night's coal fire, someone's overcooked kippers, and a mysterious undertone best not identified before breakfast. Your room is the size of a generous broom cupboard, but somehow the air in here feels heavier than outside. Every breath scratches a little. You pull your blanket closer, only to realize the thing is more abrasive than comforting. It might have started life as wool, but years of use have transformed it into something with the texture of old rope and tragedy. Lifting your head off the pillow leaves an outline of gritty black on your cheek, a Victorian beauty mark, courtesy of the city's relentless obsession with burning anything that will smolder. Somewhere downstairs, a neighbor coughs with the gusto of a coal-powered machine. Pipes clang. Floorboards groan and creak under mysterious footsteps, either Mrs. Green, your landlady, preparing to threaten weak tea from the ashes, or one of the other renters trying desperately to flee the building without being offered a slice of cold, undercooked bacon. The windows near your bed are so thin that you can hear horses clopping by, splashing through puddles that have somehow found their way indoors. You reach for some relief from the cold. Sadly, all you find is a dainty draft that sneaks through the gaps in every window frame. This is not the kind of gentle breeze people talk about in novels. No, this air is hostile, damp, insistent, and determined to carry a bit of the great outdoors straight onto your bed. You notice your breath fogs a little. It is the closest you will get to having a private cloud, unless you count the billowing plumes of smoke that seep in from neighboring chimneys. Breakfast is calling. Actually, it is more of a sad whimper than a call. Downstairs on a chipped plate, you are greeted by a slice of bread, just the one, because extravagance is suspicious, possibly yesterday's, forgivingly fried in something labeled as fat, but which has a distinct aftertaste of mystery. There is porridge too, which clings to the spoon with all the optimism of damp wallpaper. The tea is brown, but that is the most honest thing you can say about it. Hygiene, you might notice, is taking a holiday. Cutlery is cleanish, in the sense that it is not actively sticky. The water for your tea was boiled, probably, maybe, at some point this week. Milk is a gamble. Sugar, well, if you have any, you are rebelling against the sad, gray tide of blandness that seems to swallow even the idea of taste. Outside, the famous British fog gives itself a round of applause. It slips in under the door, makes itself at home in your lungs, and pools artfully in every shadow. It is not just outside. The fog prefers an inside gig where it can mingle with the fine layers of soot and grease on every surface. You clamber back upstairs, running fingers along the icy handrail, palms growing black with residue you will never quite wash off. A moment's pause to appreciate the modern miracle of central heating. Picture it, a room warmed by more than your own disappointment. Windows that do not rattle like the sighs of lost souls. Glass thick enough to silence your neighbor's cough. And that perpetual symphony of drips, knocks, and distant dogs. Instead, here you are, in a world where double glazing would sound like the brag of a royal, and hot water is just a theory. Still, you have to admit, there is a certain camaraderie in shared discomfort. Anyone else awake in this building is on the same grimy team, united by soot-stained bedding, questionable breakfasts, and the comforting certainty that whatever the day brings, at least you have started at full misery and can only go up from here. Out through the crooked doorway, you step straight into Victorian London's version of adventure, the street. Immediately, your shoe finds a puddle that is both shallower and more mysterious than anything you would tolerate today. It is best not to dwell on what exactly makes it so slick. The paving stones are tiled in a patchwork of dark stains, streaks of unidentifiable goop, and heaps of well, let's call it evidence of local transportation. The city is kept moving by 4 legs and no indoor plumbing, so you learn the artful step hop, aiming for any surface that seems only moderately terrifying. The air out here is even richer. You are laced in the perfume of coal smoke, day-old fish, and that heady tang of raw sewage, all of it chased by a gust of cold fog that slides indifferent fingers down your collar. Sellers yell about eels and pies. Someone nearby hawks dubious potions from a handcart. Children sword fight with burning sticks. If you ever accused a modern city of sensory overload, you owe the present day an apology. For a moment, you consider pausing to take it all in. But standing still is just giving the world's hazards more time to locate you. Humanity is packed tight, pressed shoulder to shoulder between carriages, carts grown under potatoes or bricks, or something you hope is not livestock, but probably is. Every crosswalk is unofficial. Timing your dash between dashing carts may be the city's only real sport. Signals and painted lines are decades away. You do your best imitation of a local and somehow avoid being flattened by a hansom cab. Adding to the spectacle is the great London particular, that famous fog. Sometimes it is just an atmosphere. Today it is almost physical. A soup of yellow-brown gloom so thick you could butter your bread with it. The fog rolls in and swallows details. Facades flatten, lamp posts glow like distant ghostly orbs, and anything 20 feet away is just a rumor. You catch half a dozen voices at once. Newspaper boys, flower girls with hands more blackened than their posies, and a stout man attempting to sell you a handful of leeches for some alleged complaint. Of course, you are missing a few modern luxuries right about now. Not a digital map in sight, or a helpful voice instructing you to turn left in 50 feet. Instead, every new street looks identical in its damp, grubby way. You wander by instinct, guided mostly by the urge not to end up face to face with a barrow of onions, or something large and angry with hooves. Crossings come with risk, like real-life Frogger, only instead of cheerful beeps and colorful pixels, there are surly drivers, horse whinnies, and the ever-present 1-2 punch of fog and manure. your hands come away sticky from the railings. You dare not check your shoes. A cart splashes another arc of brownish liquid at your ankles, which officially means you are blending in now. The rhythm on the street comes from the clatter of hooves, iron wheels over cobbles, the barking of vendors, and the occasional argument conducted with more hand gestures than words. Above it all, that peculiar hush of the fog, softening some sounds, magnifying others, lets you feel both exposed and oddly hidden at once. Lost is a fair description, but there is a kind of morbid curiosity to the chaos. Each turn gives you something new to marvel at and avoid. Sidewalks here are more moral guideline than physical boundary, blending seamlessly with piles of trash, splashes of who knows what, and the occasional pile of something steaming and best ignored. Yet the city keeps bustling. People find their way, even without luminous signals or GPS satellites to show them where to go. And you wonder how many coats the average Londoner went through in a winter before they gave up and just called it streetwear. Modern navigation, you realize, is less about finding your way and more about never needing to know exactly what you just stepped in. So you shuffle on, nose burning, eyes watering, wary, but also slightly enchanted by this parade of hazards. If nothing else, you suddenly appreciate the miracle of a clean, dry pavement and a little blue dot that always knows where you are, even if it would not help you find an honest pie in this crowd. You finally escape the worst of the street, ducking into a cramped cafe or what passes for one. Inside, the air is warmer, but mostly because smoke from the stove has nowhere else to go. You scan the menu, though in truth your choices run from gray to grayer. For the average Londoner on a tight budget, breakfast means bread that resists teeth, porridge with less personality than the spoon, tea the color of puddle water, and possibly a slice of bacon. The bacon is thin, marbled with something you hope is fat, and always cold. As for flavor, think shadows of smoke and a dash of anxiety. You bring bread to your mouth. It crumbles in an odd, powdery way. If it tastes a bit chalky, well, there is a reason for that. Honest flour is a privilege. Most bakers pad out their goods with whatever white powder is handy. Chalk is popular. Plaster, too, if you are feeling lucky. Eating it, you are forced to confront new textures. One bite, and you wonder if your jaw has become a bricklayer's trowel. Your tea arrives. It is, optimistically, more transparent than strong, a warm, tannic hint that water was involved. Sugar is doled out sparingly, and only if you are deemed trustworthy or a confirmed masochist. Milk is risky. You sniff and detect the faint whiff of adventure. The question is not whether it is fresh. The question is, will your gamble pay off, or will you spend the afternoon in gastrointrospective regret? The porridge, for lack of a better word, waits sullenly in its bowl. It is lumpy, somehow both wet and resistant to your spoon, and chilled just enough to make you consider skipping meals altogether. Butter is a mythical substance, at least the kind made from cows. Margarine exists, but do not ask for an ingredient list unless you are prepared to learn new words for disappointment. Pickles wait on the counter, acid bright and slightly alarming. Their color is less from nature and more from copper, a touch of modern chemistry, or at least what passes for it. There is also bacon, if you really insist. You contemplate the delicate shimmer on its surface. In the right light, it gleams with the worry of a coin at the bottom of a riverbed. It is nearly as salty and only half as satisfying. If you manage a second bite, you count yourself among the bravest. There is always an odd aftertaste. Some say it is wood smoke. Others are less charitable in their guesses. As you sit, picking your way through breakfast landmines, you remember a time when food labels were only a twinkle in a reformer's eye. These days, we grumble about sell-by dates and roll our eyes at the fine print on the yogurt. But here, the closest thing to a warning label is how quickly your teeth start to ache. You think about modern food poisoning, a lonely inconvenience announced by text to your group chat. In Victorian London, it is a shared learning experience. If you are lucky, it is just a bizarre new flavor. If not, well, you will cross that bridge on your next visit to the apothecary. So you manage a few reluctant bites, building a private theory that anyone who survived Victorian breakfast must have developed superhuman digestion, or simply stopped paying attention to what breakfast was meant to taste like. All the same, you find a small victory in every edible moment, and the distinct relief that you live in a world where someone, somewhere, checks for copper before your pickles reach the table. Let us say you are a Victorian child, not the ruffled, storybook kind, but very much real and awake before the sun even considers showing up. Your morning starts with a cough, courtesy of last night's soot. If you are lucky, you get a slice of bread, maybe even two if your mother is feeling rebellious. Then it is out the door and straight into adulthood, minus the luxurious bits. The street outside is not your playground. It is your workplace. Maybe you are small and nimble. Congratulations, you are prime chimney sweep material. Breakfast is followed by a pleasant climb up the flue, armed with a brush and a tolerance for tight spaces. The world up there is black, hot, and oddly echoing. Every scrape of your brush sends down a cloud of soot thick enough to turn clean air into a suggestion. You finish, return to street level, and discover you are exactly as filthy as the job requires. Perhaps you are assigned factory duty. Adventure takes the form of endless machines, hot, noisy, and always hungry. Your job is to keep things fed, keep your limbs out of the way, and dodge the meaningful glances of a supervisor whose main hobby seems to be unscheduled lectures on punctuality. Shoes are optional, bandages are common, and earplugs are pure science fiction. You pick up the rhythm quick, clatter, clang, the occasional yelp, and the relentless tick of a clock that refuses to run faster no matter how much you glare at it. Or perhaps your family found space for you at a charity school. Lessons come with a complimentary draft and a side order of overcrowding. There are enough children per square foot to challenge the fire codes, if such things existed. The teacher, best described as distracted, tries to keep order with the help of a stick, and a stare with the power to turn porridge to stone. Books are reused, pages missing here or there, and distinctions between math and moral education are mostly theoretical. If you are not listening carefully, you might not notice when the lesson changes from sums to don't steal your neighbor's shoes. You find yourself thinking about your current school life, with desks, mysterious Wi-Fi problems, and teachers who sometimes hand out stickers. Homework is dull, sure, but it is rarely coated in coal dust. There are no stern adults demanding you know the weight of a sack of potatoes by feel. Your deepest challenge is a group project, not a broken finger or a lunchtime spent coaxing a heel out of the mud. Coffee, for the record, is a beverage for the distant future or the scandalously well-off. Here, morning fuel means weak tea and an abiding hope the water was recently boiled. Your midday snack is bread again, or a piece of fruit if you live dangerously. You glance around at your classmates. Nobody's main worry is forgetting a locker combination. It is more likely about who will end up teaching the younger kids how to dodge stray dogs or the occasional cart. Yet, somehow, you manage. Learning to spell words like factory and cholera is less of an academic triumph than a practical one. The days are long, and the lessons are often harder than the benches you sit on. But compared to homework, hauling coal or climbing a chimney turns out to be the sort of extra credit you could probably live without. So next time you dream up complaints about algebra or cafeteria food, just remember, at least your idea of a bad day does not involve getting stuck up a flue before sunrise or trying to keep 10 toes in a room full of metal gears. And you can always demand coffee, which is more than can be said for your Victorian self, who is now, once again, coughing up a small soot deposit and wishing for a nap. Now imagine you land an invitation to an exclusive Victorian parlor. This is high society, soft carpets, shining chandeliers, and furniture designed mainly to look at, not sit on. You do your best to blend in, brushing as much street dust from your coat as you can, though there is only so much you can do. Everyone in the room appears immaculate. Gloved hands hold porcelain teacups steady, and fashionable shoes rest on unspeakably expensive rugs. Of course, no one mentions that every delicate surface carries a quiet memory of London soot, or that the flowers in the vase are wilting from last night's coal fog. Manners are everything. No one sits until invited. Napkins are arranged just so, forks and spoons aligned like a military drill. You try to mimic your neighbors, long posture, polite nods, smile only when appropriate. You suppress the urge to scratch at the tight collar digging into your neck, or wince at the faint clatter of your own empty stomach. Around you, every cough is smothered discreetly. No one ever sneezes, at least not out loud. Instead, people exchange bland pleasantries and keep their focus on the etiquette, not the air quality. The women of the house make a show of sitting straight, tightly swaddled in corsets that defy most modern safety codes. There is a faint air of suspense. Who will slide gracefully onto the fainting couch this afternoon, after a dose of too tight lacing and too little breakfast? Fainting is accepted as a kind of hobby, the natural outcome of being decorative and restricted. For the rest of the guests, endurance is less about intellect and more about surviving tea without publicly gasping for air. Sandwiched between Dacre and decorum, you might notice the odd contradiction. Impeccable shoes, but filthy streets. Gleaming cutlery, but water that is sketchy at best. Perfumed air, except for the persistent undertone of wet wool and coal smoke. Everyone is trained to ignore discomfort, to favor style over sanitation, and to treat minor physical complaints as character flaws, not symptoms. A polite cough is forgiven. A hacking fit marks you as a social hazard. Discussing illness aloud is simply not done, unless you are fishing for pity or a new prescription from someone's private stash. You shift in your seat, adjusting to a chair with the plushness of old driftwood, and give thanks for today's world. Modern gatherings trade starched collars for soft fleece, and joyfully accept a lack of posture as a statement of authenticity. Couches are for lounging. Fainting is a medical emergency, and a sudden sneeze only warrants a polite bless you, not an awkward group silence. In this Victorian room, you struggle to keep up with the social script, dodging real discomfort with practiced nods, and hoping you are not next in line for the fainting couch. All things considered, it turns out comfort is an underrated modern virtue. Let us say your stroll through London leaves you with a headache and a cough. Shocking, really, after 5 minutes of city air and one Victorian breakfast. So, you are tempted to seek out some relief. But remember, you are now deep in the era when medicine is more adventure sport than science. You step into a pharmacy, or what passes for one. The shelves are a cheerful display of remedies whose main ingredient is hope, closely followed by poison. You are offered laudanum as a universal panacea, a little vial promising a peaceful nap, though it is basically opium with a prettier name. No warning labels, just a flowery description and advice to take as needed. Side effects include not waking up on schedule, but that does not seem to bother anyone. Perhaps your symptoms are more dramatic. The pharmacist suggests a mercury ointment for that rash. Mercury will cure your skin, but incidentally, it will take your sanity, and sometimes your teeth along with it. If you are feeling blocked up, there is syrup of lead on the shelves, ready to brighten your complexion, and, as a bonus, slowly poison you from the inside out. No sense asking for the organic section. Everything here is naturally dangerous by design. Doctors themselves are a mixed blessing. Headaches, they might recommend a brisk bloodletting just to freshen your humors. Sore throat, perhaps some leeches, or a draught of brandy fortified with experimental chemicals. Because nothing says, get well soon, like a swirling mystery in a cup. The local barber shop also offers medical intervention if you fancy an impromptu dental extraction or a session with sharp implements and little sterilization. At least the waiting room is the same as the haircut queue. You start to wonder if it would be safer to simply stay unwell. But the advertisements call to you. Glorious painted signs promise instant relief from everything: colic, gout, hysteria, and the vague condition known as nerves. Bottles of patent medicine line every shopfront. The most trusted names in Victorian wellness offer concoctions built on pure alcohol, or a proprietary blend of ingredients no one can legally spell. Testimonials feature rosy-cheeked children, surely thrilled by the morphine elixir that finally lets them sleep through the night. You are tempted to try one. But then remember, what does not kill you in this era probably just makes your joints ache in new and interesting ways. For comparison, today, you would be Googling your symptoms, convinced you have something rare before realizing you are just dehydrated. But here, people are content with a syrup that quiets a cough and quiets just about everything else, too. Doctors do show some variety. Some are passionate leech enthusiasts. Others prefer cups of burning alcohol applied to your back or poultices that smell worse than the Thames. If you show up with a mild complaint, there is a good chance you will leave lighter in blood, hair, or general faith in humanity. Yet, somehow, everyone you meet swears by their favorite treatment. As you choke down a spoonful of mysterious brown liquid, you try not to picture its ingredients. The pharmacist winks, reassuring you that if it tastes terrible, it must be working. Standing in this world, you become aware that just feeling a bit off could spiral into a visit with the apothecary, the barber shop, and a house call from a man with an impressive mustache, each with their own toolkit of alarming possibilities. You find yourself quietly grateful for today's world of over-the-counter ibuprofen, ingredients labels, and the ability to run away from anyone suggesting a medicinal leech. So next time you have a sniffle, take a moment to appreciate not being offered lead syrup or told your best chance is to bleed out the bad feelings. Victorian medicine worked in mysterious, sometimes final ways, and you come away with a new admiration for anyone who survived both the disease and the cure. As the final scraps of sunlight withdraw, London settles into its more secretive shape. The city feels different now, everything muted, sharper, colder. You notice how the air grows dense, picking up the still-burning coal smoke and a quiet tension. The sounds thin out, shouting fades, boots scuff softer. The city's thrum replaced by a more private anxiousness you can almost hear between breaths. It is the hour when those without a proper roof start to weigh their options. Spoiler, there are not many. You weave past the stern silhouette of a workhouse, its brick exterior giving nothing away except maybe a chill. A small queue has formed, not frantic, not hopeful, just resignedly practical. There is a sign, formal and uninspired, laying out the rules. The fashion for order comes with a price, warm food and a straw bed, but only if you hand over even the shreds of choice. A matron appears, keys jangling, delivering instructions with a politeness so dry you could use it to scrub the floor. There is no welcome speech here, only the efficient processing of need. The worst thing about the place, perhaps, is how ordinary it all seems. Some blocks away, the respectable classes are busy with their own ceremonial retreat. Heavy drapes come down, hot bricks are slipped between the sheets, and slippers are paired up by the bed, though someone inevitably complains about the lump in the mattress or the draft from a window left just a fraction open. Pillows may not pass muster, but at least no one's sleeping under a pile of potato sacks. On the edge of the lamplight, you stumble across quieter rituals. Just beyond the workhouse gates, an older man patches together a nest of newspapers and stolen wool. Two children, siblings probably, share a threadbare blanket, rumpled and far too small for the task at hand. The alley doubles as bedroom and hallway, each stone a reminder that comfort is mostly a rumor. The wind takes its time exploring every gap in your clothing, a sort of mobile sleep inspector making sure you remember whose city this is. You pause, thinking about how much fuss it takes to get your own bed just right, the squabble over mattress firmness, the pursuit of perfect pillows, the little sigh of relief when you get the temperature just so. Here, the main luxury is a patch of ground that is not already occupied, plus a wall at your back. Bedtime snacks mean rationed crusts, or the last dregs from a paper-wrapped supper. There is a camaraderie in this, a practiced routine silent as nightfall. Space is negotiated in whispers, and a grim sort of humor seeps through about the charms of London nightlife. At least the company is interesting, if you like strong opinions on the best doorstep in the neighborhood. The distance between inside and outside feels impossibly wide. In the comfort of parlors, bedtime is a chance to fuss and rearrange. On the street, sleep means accepting whatever the city will spare. Yet, both worlds share the same darkness, the same craving for rest. Only the odds of waking up somewhere warm are not evenly dealt, but humanity does not quite turn off with the lights. There are shared looks, the rare trade of an old scarf, the kind of conversation that rides the line between sarcasm and sympathy. Someone laughs at the futility of flattening cardboard, Another offers advice about an archway that blocks most of the wind. The small things matter here: a dry step, a stray coin, the memory of a softer place. You head home, shoes cold and thoughts even colder, privately amused that the day's great worry is whether your mattress is a little too soft. By now, you know that true discomfort comes in layers: a wary glance at the workhouse door, a borrowed blanket, and a determination to wake up in one piece. Modern fussiness, as it turns out, is its own luxury. And the city, after a long, gray day, yawns and turns over, reminding anyone still awake that rest, of any kind, is always worth treasuring. As midnight stalls over London and soot settles on every leftover crumb, it becomes hard not to tally up the day's most questionable moments. Breakfast, that doubled as a dental challenge, journeys over pavements rich in both character and manure. Health tonics with enough opium to make the whole city dream in sepia. It is a strange highlight reel, the city's comfort hierarchy, ranging from lumpy parlor couches to a borrowed square of cardboard, shaped an entire population who could laugh at hardship, or at least cough politely at it. Somehow hidden beneath all the smoke and absurdity, there is evidence of something tough and a little bit defiant. It took a certain optimism, maybe just stubborn denial, to believe that a spoonful of lead syrup, chased by tepid tea, counted as self-care. Still, people got by, managing both the filth and the farce with an odd sense of teamwork. And the city kept on breathing, even if no one recommended inhaling too deeply. Looking back, it is impossible to miss how much better things smell and taste now. There is some deep comfort knowing clean air comes standard. Labor laws block the prospect of a chimney before breakfast, and the worst threat in a modern kitchen is an undercooked pie. Even the mattress debate shrinks down to a punchline. The real miracle is having one at all, plus bedding, that is not considered a public health experiment. It is tempting, in the gentle dark, to hug a pillow out of pure, relieved thanks, or to linger in the bathroom a little longer, just because you can, with running water that does not look like a chemistry experiment, and the quiet certainty no one is about to prescribe you a refreshing arsenic tonic for your sniffles. There's nothing terribly heroic about comfort, but it has its own reward. It lets you sit back, listen to a little rain outside, and know that tomorrow's alarm might be dreadful. But it is still a whole lot better than waking up to soot on the pillow, cold tea, and the thrum of midnight London rolling on outside your freezing window. In the heart of the Andes, beneath the watchful gaze of stone sentinels and glacier-bright peaks, the city of Cusco pulsed with the order and quiet authority of the living Inca Empire. There, as dawn filtered through the slats of a clay-walled courtyard, Suma knelt beside his master, hands steady, eyes intent upon a tangle of cords dyed in hues that seemed borrowed from the mountains themselves. Ochre for the earth, crimson for bloodlines, indigo as deep as night. The Quipu, an improbable tangle to the uninitiated, unfurled in their hands a living memory. Each not a syllable, a census, a petition, or a decree. It was not only numbers and goods, but stories, heartbreak, lineage, victories, losses, history woven not with ink, but with disciplined, calloused fingers. Suma had come to this practice as a boy, restless and lean, taken in by the illustrious Quipu who saw, in his untutored dexterity and hunger for pattern, a rare companion in craft. The method was rigorous. Wool cleaned of burr and lichen, fingers washed with river water before each labor, colors carefully chosen. The thread for maize counted apart from the thread for land, for warriors or sacrificial llamas, under the soft-spoken authority of his master. Each morning's work was both a ritual and an unspooling of memory, an act of faith that the empire's long braid of days remained in their care. To learn the Quipu was to learn reverence for both order and ambiguity. Each chord, branching or spiraling, demanded a reading of shadow as much as substance, a dexterous adjustment of knots, not too tight to risk splitting the wool, not so loose as to fade to nothing. The faint, patient rhythm of Suma's breathing matched the subtle tension of the chords. His master, stooped with the years and crowned with the salt-flecked fringe of a once black queue, murmured stories that filtered between strands, of a time before the great road was finished, before the Sapa Inca's robe sparkled like morning frost. There was tenderness in such telling, a faith that memory forbidden from speech might still find sanctuary in pattern. But the peace of the courtyard, the enduring hush of the Quipu room, was trembling with portent. The streets beyond were restless. There had been rumors, less rumor now than certainty, of men with faces pale as moonlit stones, encased in gleaming shells, speaking a language harsh and hissing. Suma, whose days had been measured by colored knots and the weight of his master's hand, felt the city's pulse shift. Temple fires burned with less assuredness. Messengers arrived at odd hours, faces tight with news that never quite became words. At night, the city's hush was broken by the thump of unfamiliar boots and an unfamiliar dread. What use was memory if those who would understand it marched toward oblivion? One evening, as the air thickened with smoked maize and the dusk trembled over Sacsayhuaman's shadowed ramparts, Suma sat long after his master had retired, running his fingers through a new set of chords. He practiced, as always, the census. Fields, llamas, children clustered by clan. But beneath his careful knots, his mind wandered to whispers he had begun hearing, stories that the strangers in armor would not honor their ways, that their records ignored the patient wisdom of cord and wool, promising instead the written word, the heavy seal, the ledger. Suma listened to the night for answers. The Quipu chords lay coiled and silent in his hands, a language so easily lost, so weightless against the coming tide. Still, each morning arrived with its thread of hope. Suma watched with quiet pride and growing trepidation as his own fingers began to move with the sureness of his master. The knots more nimble, the patterns subtler. But the task was changing. The world closing around them asked not only for census and tribute, but for remembrance, for a new kind of courage. He woke before first light, ears attentive to the distant shouts, weaving a strand that marked not maize or men, but the shape of fear itself, every knot pressed more lovingly into place, as if he could bind the memory tighter, lengthen the endurance of his world against the looming thunder to the east. The art had always been a bulwark against forgetting. Now Suma understood. Every chord was a prayer and a protest. Each carefully counted strand a fragile arm holding up the sun against the darkening edge of empire. Morning in Cusco, once a simple illumination spilling across rooftops like a benediction, had become cautious, a thin veil of gold, searching the corners for what might be lurking. Suma awoke to this new world, blinking at the stone walls dappled with the dawn, finding every detail more vivid with apprehension. As he rose, the familiar touch of his apprentice's cord, one he had knotted idly years ago to mark a rare festival, greeted him at his bedside. Today it felt heavier. The footsteps that disturbed the neighborhood now carried both rumor and expectation. Each day Suma's labor became less a matter of routine, more a declaration that the stories and reckonings of his people would not surrender quietly. In the quiet alcove beneath the temple's shadow, he gathered the pupils entrusted to him. 2 were sons of farmers from the sacred valley, another a girl whose mother's voice summoned thunder for the rain. One by one, Suma pressed strands of wool into calloused hands, guiding them with soft words toward discipline. In their faces, he found both reflection and the spark of tomorrow. A generation who might, with enough silent courage, remember what others would surely try to erase. Their lessons chafed against urgency. Suma found himself saving seconds, skipping explanations, simplifying chants once meant to anchor patience. Yet, in the hush between words, a kind of shared fortitude passed among them, a knowing that the tangle of knots they studied now served not just empire, but endurance itself. His own fingers moved with a new energy, as if memory driven by need could summon speed it never owned before. He taught the bloodlines, how to weave mother from daughter, father from son, names into colors and branching chords. Then let them not tributes, old borderlines, promises to the mountain spirits. At the close of each lesson, Suma would step outside, feeling the pre-dawn stiffness of Cusco's stones softening beneath the rush of hooves and boots. Traders hurried their shawls over baskets. A priest, hands trembling in the cold, touched his brow, habit, hope, or despair. Suma could not tell. Even the river that cleaved the city sounded wary, its song muted beneath a slab of fear. From the palace, smoke rose with indecipherable signals. Royal decrees, perhaps, or silent invocations against what was coming. The empire, vast, brittle, and beautiful, felt newly porous. Later, Suma's master summoned him atop the high terrace where the wind was pure and the sky unbroken. There is always a way to bind what must not be lost, the old man intoned, offering a length of cord thick with history, if not for the empire, then for those whose dreams still reckon with its shadow. The cords they held, knotted and dense with meaning, seemed to pulse in the sun, a pulsing not unlike blood moving through a heart. Suma felt the lesson beneath the words, that his task now was not only keeping meticulously what was demanded, but encoding what could carry spirit forward should the walls fall. Days passed marked by the steady escalation of unrest, the Spanish ever nearer, towering in rumor and occasionally glimpsed as a flash of steel on the outskirts, and ever more vivid in fear. Suma returned to his small council of learners, shifting their education from forms and counts to the essence of story. The old conquests, the floods, the tongue-tied heroics of ancestors now only alive in Quipu. He taught them new patterns, secret codes for resistance and hope, compressing the wisdom of centuries into strands that could be hidden, hurried away in sashes or hair, waiting for the hour they must be remembered. One evening, as the city braced itself against approaching storm and foreign banners licked the horizon, Suma lingered above the plaza. Below, musicians played with a forced exuberance, their rhythms tripping over old prayers. Between the chords of music and the chords at his belt, Suma sensed the secret life of his craft swelling. The Quipu was no longer only record or archive, it had become a beacon, a quiet rebellion wound into wool. Its knots a hedge against the silence that conquest desired. In these closing hours before change, Suma allowed himself one dangerous luxury: imagining the world after the storm. Not as it had been, but as it might be summoned back along a length of rescued string, if only someone would learn, remember, and continue to knot hope into the tapestry of time. Clouds gathered over Cusco in a slow, unhurried descent, cloaking the city in a persistent, shifting half-light. With each day's advance, the line between rumor and reality wavered, until the veiled approach of the Spanish became undeniable. No longer a story to frighten children, but a tremor in the city's bones. Suma watched from the temple's colonnade as banners, unfamiliar, splashed with a red cross and foreign emblems, fluttered like new omens over the hills. You could not mistake their meaning. Change had arrived, and it wore the face of strangers. The morning the Spanish entered, the city exhaled intense waves. A hush dropped over squares usually bristling with barter and laughter, and each footstep became a question. Suma moved through the alleys in the soft anonymity of a simple laborer, the Quipu, now tucked deep inside his tunic, pressing against his chest. Each thud of drum or clatter of hoof carried dread and fascination in equal measure. The air thickened with the scent of iron and strange oils, broken only by the staccato syllables of Castilian tongues. He glimpsed them first as a phalanx at the head of the great avenue. Men swathed in glinting breastplates, some astride towering horses, others swinging beads on leather cords, their eyes restless and cold. A priest, bearded and robed, lifted a cross high above the crowd, its wood stark against the stone grandeur of the city. The Inca nobles stood assembled in a formal choreography, expressionless, robed in layers and gold, their silence more eloquent than any greeting. Here, Suma saw how an empire recognized another, both proud and wary, meeting across the gulf of their untranslatable intentions. If the Spanish gaze was greedy and unsettled, their words were no less invasive. Decrees poured from the lips of men who wore swords and inkpots alike. Scribes perched at makeshift desks on the palace steps, scratching feverish records in foreign books. Suddenly, the Quipu was mocked, dismissed by officials with flippant gestures, declared a pagan vestige by friars who could not read what the knots preserved. "You must use our letters," one interpreter crudely announced through a mangled tongue. "For the king, for the god you must now know." Suma felt the validity of his art questioned at each front, the scoffing of conquerors, the weariness in the eyes of his students, the nervousness within the palace itself. Emissaries brought the Quipu forth to demonstrate their craft, only to be dismissed with bored impatience. Still, Suma persevered in shadow, working at twilight and in windowless cells, his hands familiar now with the language of caution. He began hiding chords beneath temple offerings, encoded in patterns only the initiated might decipher. In this darkening world, the Quipu's purpose changed. It became not official record, but whispered testimony. The streets transformed anew. Where market women once sang tallying prices and children repeated lineage as play, now wary glances followed every foreign presence. The sounds of law and conquest filtered through every archway. The toll of a bell, the slow march of armed assembly, the barking of timeless words warped by new tongues. Suma saw his master's back bending, The old man's strength, leached by a world too suddenly altered. Students came less frequently, fearing they might be marked as subversive, for to not one's memory had itself become a clandestine act. Yet the city's dignity endured, veiled though it was. Among allies, Suma found secret meetings, small gatherings in dim courtyards, the tap of knuckles in place of song. Here, stripped of pretense, they spoke plainly. What can survive? Who will remember when language is outlawed, when knowledge is laughed into silence? Even as fear crept along the walls, hope flickered in a single shared glance, a determination to preserve what breathed beneath the Spanish veil. One evening, among the columns arrayed in shadow, Suma turned over in his mind a new question. Could the heart of the Quipu, its rhythm, its pulse, be transformed, encrypted, hidden even deeper? The answer, he realized, must be carried in the hands, in the threads, in the subtle defiance of living memory, for in the age of letters, he would not what words might not endure. The city's pulse, once sure and harmonious, faltered beneath the imposed cadence of foreign order. In the weeks that followed the Spanish conquest, stewards of the Old World, Kaskias who bore messages, priests who summoned sun at the solstice, found their functions clipped and their voices hollowed. Gold vanished from niches, transformed from sacred adornment to spoils of hunger. Temples were razed or remade, their altars surmounted by unfamiliar icons. Through these changes moved Suma, his every step less a procession than a negotiation with absence. His master, diminished but unbroken, called for him less frequently now, speaking in whispers clouded by regret and long years. In the veiled light of their private chamber, the old man confessed that the Quipu's lineage, once proudly public, a symbol of shared memory, passed now by necessity from hand to hand in fits and fringes. The cord keeps, he rasped one night, but who will keep the keepers? Suma did not answer, nor did he blink. That sorrow lived behind each knot he made. The city's new rulers made records of another kind, ink staining imported parchment, names forever distorted by unfamiliar letters. Suma observed, in quiet horror, how tales of birth or a season's abundance, once collectively confirmed in woven register, now became singular, brittle, at risk of loss with every careless stroke. The lush complexity of kinship was reduced to an inventory. He watched officials glance dismissively at the knotted cords, as if confronting an artifact, oblivious to their density of meaning, their living dignity. Sometimes, defiance found its way in fragments. Suma was not alone. In cramped kitchens and stifling storerooms, a brotherhood of former Quipu met to share warnings and devise codes more furtive still. They tied messages into belts, embroidered memories into the warp of simple tunics, devised new methods of numbering so recognition would travel only among those who had learned before the cleaving. The Quipu became both repository and cipher, an act of preservation masquerading as routine. Yet even as he plotted survival, Suma bore witness to a fading. The young, once eager in their study, dispersed to the fields, drawn away by necessity or the lure of new customs. Sometimes, a student returned at dusk, face bowed in apology, fingers trembling as they tried to recall the foundation knots. Suma corrected errors with patient gestures, his words careful, aware that even the shadows could now carry suspicion. To teach was to risk, to remember an act of resistance. Meanwhile, the empire itself unraveled. Sapa Inca, stripped of golden finery, languished in shadow, surrounded by men whose prayers were foreign and whose ambitions endless. Edicts, translated and retranslated, lost the scaffolding of custom. Festival cycles dissolved into numbering that matched the conqueror's calendar, robbing days of their meaning. The city shrank within itself, rituals retreating behind closed doors, the light in the streets a mere imitation of its former self. Suma walked those shrinking byways, feeling the absence of voices that had once recounted lineage for the joy of it, not obligation. The statues of ancestors, now chipped and defaced, seemed to echo each vanished syllable, their silence heavy against the encroaching noise of conquest. In the marketplace, gossip replaced song. The exchange of goods followed a new rhythm dictated by scared compliance. Change was not only in the streets, but in the very air, a slow, collective exhale as the threads holding the world taut weakened with every passing day. Still, he worked. By lamplight, he crafted new chords, threading into their sequence histories disguised as inventories, prayers masked as tallies. His hands, once sure of audience and purpose, now persisted by habit, will, and desperation. The art he loved wore the mask of utility, its soul folded deep inside. Even as the tapestry of empire unraveled, Suma continued his patient binding, making each knot an anchor thrown toward a future he could no longer see, yet could not abandon. With each year that unspooled beneath foreign banners, Cusco's stones weathered both sky and memory. Pale sunlight found its way through narrow passages inside the old quarters, where the air grew heavy with the bitterness of nostalgia and the calm defiance of preservation. There Suma, sparser of hair, surer of hand, still lean with quiet persistence, continued his silent calling. The threads in his workroom multiplied, their colors grown subtler, their meanings more layered, as if hiding resilience in the twist of every chord. Sometimes in the hush of pre-dawn, he sifted through ancient skeins, fingertips reverent. Here lay a tally of bread, there the saga of a lost river, or an account of rebellion suffocated by silence. What others perceived as obsolete, Suma treasured as lifelines. Each knot, when revisited, bared not only the toil of its weaving, but the moment of heart that called it forth. A daughter's birth in the year the stars flickered wildly, a tribe's migration before the mountain's flanks collapsed. The Quipu became a chorus of centuries, beckoning to anyone who would listen in patience. His master, now a wisp of former pride, passed one night as the lamps guttered out, departing in a breath as soft as unraveling thread. Suma mourned as custom allowed, a day spent in fast and silence, purifying his hands in the river's icy run, carving a small stone for remembrance. Yet the true vigil unfolded over many evenings, fingers working in darkness, winding together a memorial cord. Into its knots, he pressed the old man's laughter, his sternness. The fragments of wisdom murmured while the city still believed itself immortal. Ever after, Suma would touch that strand before beginning any new labor, invoking not so much the man as the generations stitched within him. Years drifted, and the old certainties of the world shrank behind veils of new speech, new law, new gods. Suma adjusted, translating his teaching to brief, unobtrusive encounters. A whispered hint here, a pressed chord there, the faintest trace of the ancient code left at the edge of a tiller's field or a mason's meal. Now and then, a child showed curiosity as they watched his patient fingers. Now and then, A widow remembered a prayer that could only be tied, not spoken. Through these faint yet persistent avenues, the heart of his art pressed through, subtle but alive, never entirely extinguished. Sometimes he dreamed of the great festivals, processions ablaze with song and gold, and sometimes of the Spanish scribe, bent over his blue-black ink, oblivious to the knowledge he failed to perceive. But most often Suma's mind returned to the tactile now, the warp and twist beneath his thumb, the hum of intention in each knot. Time itself seemed woven along these fragile lines, memory fraying at the edges, yet refusing to dissolve. He knew, with neither arrogance nor despair, that some meanings can drift undetected for centuries, sleeping in artifacts until boldness or hunger wakes them. The city built stone upon rubble, faith upon ruins. Children once again played in the alleys, their laughter modulated by new customs. Yet echoes of old words found purchase amid the games. Suma, ignored or regarded as an oddity, persisted, his practice outliving the permission granted by any ruler. He observed the days, moving with gentle discretion through a world that owed him no notice. But as he lay chords into careful bundles, aged hands shaking only when the emotion ran too high, he felt the minor tremor of legacy. Toward the end, when twilight pooled in doorways and the light trembled on distant hills, Suma wove a final quipu unlike any before. Not for census or decree, nor for tribute or survival, but as a vessel of pure memory, his thread, his city, his vanished world consigned to the patience of wool. When finished, he tucked it away beneath a boundary stone at the edge of the temple's foundation, where the earth had always felt receptive. He did not mark the place, trusting that finding it would require a seeker of rare and earnest intention. Thus the work survived, not by law nor royal command, but by perseverance, understanding, and hope set quietly against time's indifferent march. What began as instruction and duty became resistance. What endured as private longing became a gift. From Suma, last of his lineage and first of the forgotten, the language of chords drifted forward, waiting to be heard by hands yet unborn. The dawn rises slowly over Hokkaido, as if reluctant to lay bare the veiled secrets of its northern wilds. There is a hush in the ancient forests, a hush broken only by the tentative stirring of wind among the slender, upright stalks of bamboo. Here, on the edge of a small Ainu village, where mountains wore perpetual mist, like ceremonial robes, Takashi breathes in the world inherited from his forebears, though he is not yet sure what of it he can keep. Beneath the thatched roof of the weathered workshop, dust motes float in shards of new sunlight. Old tools, chisels, files, thin iron awls darkened by years of handling, hang precisely on the walls, their arrangement unchanged since his grandfather's last slow summer. In the center, a long wooden workbench serves as both altar and battleground, where raw bamboo is transformed. Takashi runs a hand with cautious reverence over a length of pale bamboo. Scarred green gives way to creamy gold at the node, and there clings the faint memory of a river's song. Every morning, the forest sends up its offerings, the subtle tang of earth, the cool breath off moss-thick stones, the high staccato calls of distant black woodpeckers. Takashi has always believed that spirits drift in the spaces between these sounds. Now, standing alone, it is the sound of emptiness that feels largest of all. Grandfather is gone, and with him, 1,000 unwritten instructions on carving, binding, and blessing the simple shinabu, the bamboo flute whose music, once woven through festival and funeral alike, meant that the soul of the Ainu endured, yet the forest remembers. In the garden behind the workshop, the bamboo sways restlessly. It is not only material, but memory, each stalk marked by winters grown brittle and summers spent glossing up to the warm rain. Grandfather once told Takashi that a true flute begins not with the hands, but with the noticing, the gentle meditation that comes before the cut. Listen, always listen first, he would say, eyes closed, as if attuned to energies beneath leaf and bark. The yukar are stories. Live in the wood before you speak them into air. Takashi learned the steps as a child, sitting cross-legged on the dirt floor, small fingers sticky with resin. Remove the joints. Let the cane season in cool dark for years. Never rush, for impatience splits both root and reed. Shape with humility, for a flute cannot be forced. The first cuts, shallow and uncertain, teach respect more than technique. He remembers nicking his own thumb and grandfather smiling, a trace of pride beneath the concern. You bleed not for your mistake, but for the love that keeps you trying, he said. Even wounds become music. Outside, the world shakes with changes Takashi is too young to entirely grasp, but old enough to feel tight around his chest, like a binding. Japanese schoolmasters visit, their voices clipped and insistent, urging Ainu children to abandon the language of their grandparents for the sharp syllables of Tokyo. Banners in Sapporo flutter with unfamiliar promise, the news of assimilation policies drifting from raylines into even this secluded place. There are whispers that Ainu flutes are little more than relics, better left for curious foreigners or glass cabinets far from these woods. But within the workshop, a place lined with wood smoke and memory, the old rules linger tenaciously. Takashi lifts the half-shaped flute to his lips, heart uneven with longing and defiance. The note he coaxes is tentative, wild, drifting up into the spaces only his ancestors would recognize. Tradition is not only what the elders left, he realizes, but what he chooses now, shape by shape, breath by careful breath. He pauses, holding the flute aloft in a slanting band of light. Even the tiniest imperfection, the smallest slip of the blade, marks a difference in tone, a memory of wind, of his grandfather's calloused hands, of the deeper songs only the bamboo can recall. The birth of a flute, he senses, is a ritual of translation, to bring out of earth and silence the fragile architecture of sound and soul. Each flute, once finished, is both instrument and elegy, a narrow bridge spanning loss and hope. In the evenings, as pale mist unfurls along the edge of the village, Takashi walks the footpaths with his bundle of bamboo, seeking the places where the singing of the river is strongest. The Ainu speak in stories, yukar, that fold the ordinary into myth. Foxes dancing on frost, hidden spirits guiding a fisherman's net. Takashi wants to believe the music he is learning to shape can become its own kind of yukar, a counterspell against forgetting. The act of crafting becomes his rebellion, a silent, steadfast claim to belonging. Every flute he completes is a whisper against erasure, a tracing of self in a language older than the mapmakers. The forest, too, leans in, wind threading the bamboo groves with its own hushed countermelodies. Takashi stands once more at the workbench as night sifts blue through the room and asks, not for mastery, but for permission to remember. Here, in the place where the first cut is made, the boundaries of loss and lineage are blurred to the density and music of a living reed. It is in the gradual unfolding of days that the silence gathers weight. Between the eruption of hammer on chisel, amidst the scattered fragments of bamboo at his feet, Takashi discovers that what lingers longer than music is absence. The soft ache where the voices of the old ones no longer reach. In the village, the air is thick with a different quality. Not the sacred hush of dawn, but a hushed surrender, a rehearsed quiet pressed upon them by the world outside. The school bell clangs on the ridge each morning now, a peal as iron and insistent as the unfamiliar ink imposed upon the village's children. There are new duties and new rules. Hair is cropped, old clothes exchanged for stiff blue uniforms, and the language of the Ainu migrates quietly from open spaces to back gardens, from laughter to hurried whispers behind folding screens. The word for flute, tonkori, fills Takashi's mouth like a relic, shaped and reshaped until it cracks with a foreignness he does not wish to own. The schoolmasters come and go, their gaze flickering over the workshop's door with a mixture of curiosity and disregard. For them, the air within is thick with a history that ought to be swept away, replaced with the bright certainty of empire. In the evenings, Takashi returns home to his mother bent over her weaving, fingers flashing in the half-light, shuttle gliding through warp and weft. She tells him stories with her hands, stories of the days before, when every household in the village possessed at least one flute, and every festival was stitched with songs that made the night tremble. Now, she tells him, some families fear to even hum these tunes within earshot of strangers. The songs are less loud, but they burrow deeper, running like a darkened thread between heartbeats. One afternoon, under a sky slick and bruised with rain, an imperial official visits the workshop. He speaks in clipped, measured tones, his papers unfolded with the certainty of one bearing fate. He expects respect for his uniform and the new order he carries. He touches the finished flutes with the tip of a single gloved finger, as one might test the sharpness of a blade. Songs are for modern times now, he remarks, his eyes missing everything alive in the wood. These are curiosities. One day, even this village will understand. After he is gone, nothing feels precisely as it was. Takashi holds the half-carved flute and studies the fine dust coating his fingertips, a pale, soundless snowfall. He wonders if he is shaping an instrument or a memorial to something already lost. The forest, on these evenings, seems to retreat behind a veil of rain. Even the birds hush, as if uncertain whether their calls belong in this new order. Takashi listens for his grandfather's voice, but finds only the choked rustle of wet foliage and the hollow ache of unanswered questions. That night, he walks through the bamboo grove not to gather, but to remember. The sound of his steps is all brittle rhythm, a sequence of interruptions. Frogs sing in ditches along the path, but their melodies refuse to cohere. Lost in the cold, Takashi kneels by a cluster of younger shoots, tracing their curve with the edge of his palm. Each one is an encrypted history, lives spent swaying, bruised by wind and weighted with the memory of hands. He thinks about the line of makers before him, generations whose names have become shrouded, but whose instruments remain, hidden in chests and lacquered trunks, kept not for song anymore, but for secrecy. A tool once so full of voice is now a keeper of silence. There are moments sharp and occluded, when Takashi feels the swell of defeat wash close. The rules of the new world are written, again and again, in a tongue not his own, even as his hands remember the patterns of splitting, scraping, and beveling the bamboo's rim. His mind teeters on the knife edge between reverence and resignation. It would be easier, he thinks, to let his grandfather's workshop slide into hush, to allow dust to swallow the last of the tools. Some mornings he wakes convinced that even the act of making is an act of futility, that what he shapes is the lonely echo of a storied silence. But the memory of resistance arrives in unexpected measures. Early one morning, the neighbor's daughter, Emiko, a child whose eyes reflect the clarity of river water, slips into the workshop, silent as shadow. She asks, barely above a whisper, whether the flutes can still sing. Takashi, startled by her candor, brings a finished piece to his lips. The first note emerges, muted and unsure, but Emiko listens, as if that single tone carries the weight of return. In her expression, Takashi finds an astonishment that cuts through despair. The question is not whether the music will be silenced, but who will dare raise it again. From then on, small acts of defiance thread through the village like gold through rough cloth. Children carve reeds in secret and practice under willow trees. Mothers murmur lullabies in the syllables of their mothers, and the elderly hum melodies as they sweep their porches, choosing risk over forgetting. For Takashi, each flute completed in the shadowed hush is no longer a relic or memorial. It is a gamble, a slender declaration etched in cane and breath. Though he cannot force the tides of empire to recede, he can insist, in the marrow of every note, that silence is not chosen, but imposed, and that in its very shape there waits the longing for return. The weight of twilight settles uneasily over the valley, as if night itself fears trespassing too quickly upon this vulnerable stretch of land. Soon, the hills will dissolve into shadow-drenched folds, but for now, the world is silvered and alert, as though waiting for a signal only the heart can discern. Takashi sits up late inside the workshop, fingers stained with resin and dusk, bending quietly over the unfinished length of bamboo. Each hollow is tuned not only to tone, but to possibility, the half-imagined promise that music, if coaxed carefully enough, might set memory adrift in the currents of unspoken time. Outside, the world retreats behind drawn shoji and shutters. The imperial decree has thickened the air. Even laughter is bartered in whispers. Sometimes, drifting from across the packed earth square, Takashi can just make out the low notes of a mother nursing a child with song, the brittle lilt of old men recounting fox stories over tea. These fragments float on the edges of his consciousness, persisting under the threshold of prohibition, their rhythm syncopated by fear, but irrepressible as breath in winter. By moonrise, Emiko arrives at the workshop door, barefoot, her kimono still dusted from gathering wild herbs. She refuses the hush, insisting on her presence with stubborn, quiet ease. "Can you make a flute for me?" she asks, her question direct as the evening star. Takashi studies her. She is slight, but her posture is unbending, her glance as steady as his grandfather, S, used to be. It is not a simple request. To fashion a flute for another is a commitment, to risk, together, the forbidden act of music. But after a long pause, he nods, and she grins, small but fierce. The next days bring a hidden ceremony of selection. Together, they range the slopes seeking a suitable stock, a cane that has survived storms but bows with grace, not bitterness. Under a canopy trembling with rain-beaded leaves, Takashi kneels beside Emiko, feeling the pulse of life through the green. In silence, they commune with the plant. Only after, with a whispered blessing, does he harvest it. The severing, quick and clean, is both ending and inception. Back in the workshop, Emiko watches as Takashi splits the cane, his hands recalling each practiced motion. She is patient, learning not by instruction, but by immersion in the rasp of the file, in the careful bevel of the mouthpiece, in the low whistle as he tests for cracks. At first, the tasks seem mundane, almost tedious. But as night deepens, Takashi tells her, the time spent is not to hurry the wood into song, but to call forth what is patient within it. Emiko eyes him sidelong, as if yearning to believe this craft can resist the silence imposed from outside. When their work is done, they step underneath a sky lacquered with pebbled stars. The finished flute balanced lightly in Emiko's palm. She brings it to her lips, the gesture awkward and determined all at once. The first note is faint, wavering as a memory half remembered. She falters, breathing in sharply, and gives a shy, frustrated laugh. Takashi demonstrates, expelling a line of melody so subtle it seems to dissolve at the edge of hearing. Emiko tries again, her breath steadier, and a plaintive tune unfurls, fragile yet persistent, curling through the branches overhead where night birds tilt their heads in recognition. They play shyly, and then with growing certainty. Nothing elaborate, a few shared motifs, echoes from fragments half learned as children. The night enlarges around their sound, an invisible audience gathering in leaf and stone. From the nearby house, a curtain lifts. Takashi's mother listens, heart thudding, torn equally between pride and dread. Further away, a window glows, a sign that others too have heard, that the act of music ripples beyond its source, summoning sleepers and memories both. Afterward, Emiko sits cross-legged beside Takashi on the plank floor, tracing the grain of the workbench. She confesses, voice trembling though she refuses to look up. My grandmother used to play. She would say the flute holds sadness as well as hope. Takashi nods, recognizing in Emiko's words the lineage of burdens they both carry. To remember when memory is outlawed, to defy when defiance is woven into the very timbre of every note. With time, other children begin to visit under the camouflage of darkness. They come with excuses, returning borrowed tools, seeking advice about nets or baskets. Always they carry hunger in their eyes, hunger not for food, but for something that might reconcile them to themselves. Takashi teaches them to select bamboo, to listen for the voice in the grain, to scrape and shape and sand with patience. Each new flute is a miniature act of trust, each song a risk that is nevertheless chosen. They learn quickly that even a stolen moment of melody in the night can alter the rhythm of fear, can remind a besieged heart of its right to pulse. In these moonlit gatherings, they speak the old prayers softly, blend their breath in shared music, and in the echoing intervals, reclaim what has been threatened. Takashi understands now that the legacy his grandfather left was not only in technique or artifact, but in the courage to sound what others would have vanished. Each night, as they listen for the footfall of patrols or the warnings of distant dogs, they realize the kinship of shared peril, made bearable by the gentle architecture of layered notes. These are not bold rebellions. They are quieter, more persistent. They are the pauses between words, the insistence of culture in the hush before dawn, the way a melody lingers even after the last vibration vanishes in the cold. In teaching and crafting through the shadows, Takashi becomes a bridge between elder and child, thrill and caution, grief and continuity. The echo of each night's music hums within him, a secret persistence refusing extinction. Winter descends quietly, blanketing the village in a pall of white and shadow. The bamboo grove, now brushed in frost, stands in stark relief, a cathedral of pale pillars inscribed by cold. Under this soft hush, every ritual, every human effort takes on a sharpened significance. The passing of seasons, so long entwined with the pulse of festival and harvest, becomes less a comfort and more an urgent reckoning. Within the gloom of shorter days, Takashi feels an old sorrow settle in his bones. He senses his grandfather's absence even more acutely, as if the cold has stretched the distance between generations, between what endures and what is slipping away. Inside the workshop, breath smokes in the lantern light. Fewer children come now. Parents grow cautious, fearing not only official disapproval, but the invisible line between tradition and consequence. Danger's boundaries creep ever closer, indistinct but forceful. A neighbor's house searched for prohibited objects, a cousin summoned for questioning. A hush descending over the evening gatherings that once dared to braid together music and hope. Takashi, alone at his bench, listens to the wind worrying at the window and wonders if survival demands forgetting, if the cost of memory is now too dear. Yet necessity, at once brutal and redemptive, compels creation. The last of the seasoned bamboo, stored high in the rafters, is brought down in a slow, deliberate procession. Each stalk is a living refugee, scarred by sun and rain, made rare by the weight of what it carries. Takashi chooses with a care approaching grief, turning the canes over in his palms, alert to the faintest wrongdoing in their shape or sound. The act is wearying, hands raw, patience thinning. Yet in some paradox of loss, every step becomes more sacred for being perilous. For days he works alone. The tasks pile up in the shrinking light, slicing, hollowing, binding the sugan, the knots in the bamboo, while outside, smoke rises from fewer chimneys than before. In place of companionship, there is resolve. Takashi finds himself making flutes not as testament to abundance or festival, but as spells against vanishing. Surface after surface is sanded smooth, yet the air inside each flute seems charged with a tension he cannot name, a vibration suspended between hope and surrender. One snowy evening, Emiko appears, older now, her hair tucked tightly beneath a scarf, eyes reflecting the opacity of ice. Her presence does not trouble the silence, it clarifies it. She returns not as an apprentice, but as a bearer of news. Elders summoned to the prefecture, legal notices posted at crossroads, a new order delivered with the indifferent force of policy. She brings, too, a fragment of song, a microphone's recording, smuggled from a city archive, the wavering notes of a voice long gone. As Takashi listens, a current passes between them, acknowledgement that lines of melody, once woven into daily life, now exist only as artifacts held in strange, official custody. They speak little. There is nothing left to plan except what to carry forward and what cannot be born. Emiko asks, finally, if the tradition should end here, if, by refusing to pass it on, they would honor its spirit rather than dilute it amid suspicion and danger. Takashi, surveying the tools arrayed before him, answers not in words but in motion. He hands her the nearly finished flute, unadorned except for a single engraved spiral, the mark his grandfather once used to signify origins from lost rivers. Emiko traces the spiral, neither refusing nor accepting, her hesitation a condensation of fate and fear. In this, she and Takashi are alike, solitary yet joined by their inability to relinquish what they have held so long. With dusk spilling across frost-bitten fields, Takashi carves alone into the night, driven by the certainty that this may be his last gift, not only to Emiko, but to all who might come searching for a remnant of their own voice. He works with an economy bordered by sorrow, each movement incremental and spare. The process compresses to its essence, the breathing of wood against blade, the revelation of a sound chamber within. The steam rises from his tea, cooling slowly, mirroring the slow imprisonment of the world outside. When at last the new flute is finished, Takashi walks the edge of the village, following the ridgeline that by daylight divides field and woods, but that now separates past from future. The wind is keen, funneling through high branches, shrouding familiar landmarks with shifting drifts. He lifts the flute to his lips, drawing a tentative breath. The melody emerges cautious at first, then growing clearer as his courage crystallizes in the twilight. It is not a song of triumph, but of continuity, threading together names unspoken, marking graves left untended, coiling upward toward empty sky. As the notes suspend above the snow, Takashi feels both bereft and connected, each exhalation a transcription of what cannot safely be written, each pause between phrases weighted with memories that language cannot recapture. In playing, he senses the paradox at the heart of survival, that preservation sometimes requires letting go, that to transmit a tradition unchanged is impossible, yet to abandon it altogether is a treason too severe for his bones. The village sleeps, only the forest listens fully. Yet in the indifference of trees and wind, Takashi finds the courage to grant this song its last, unhurried breath. He returns home, the flute wrapped securely in cloth, fingers stiff with cold, a custodian not only of instruments, but of impermanence itself. Through the night, he dreams of water flowing through reeds, of voices rising and falling across generations like waves dissolving on the shore. In the realm between sleep and waking, he sees his grandfather's hands guiding his own, hears Emiko's uncertain tune echoing back, stumbles through a forest where every trunk and leaf is inscribed with the glyph of persistence. In the pale, uncertain light of dawn, Takashi awakens to a world that will never again be quite as it was. Yet there, on the workbench, lies the final flute, a vessel for memory, waiting for breath, prepared to bear witness even as the world strains to unremember the song. The city of Karakoram in the heart of the Mongol Empire was a mosaic of fevered breath and trampling hooves, where the morning sunlight was caught and broken by posts of carved bronze and gables slanting east. Market cries flew on the wind, taut and bright as silk banners tangled with horsehair and dust above the city square. Trade caravans crawled along the streets, bearing frankincense, lacquer, pearls, and iron fragments, spilling the world's riches onto the uneven cobbles of the imperial capital. Amid this lived Emir, the novice with ink-stained hands and an eye for the way shadows lean across the earth. He dwelled on the southern edge of the city, where the artisans shaped wood and parchment. The house in which he apprenticed had once belonged to a Persian scholar, and still echoed with the dry scrape of Persian verse, though now it was cluttered by worn astral charts and roll after roll of maps, some woven into the fabric, some scrawled on the backs of letters sent from distant khanates. There, on a morning sunk hazy with the promise of rain, Amir peeled back the hide of a collapsed chest and found what would change the silent confines of his world. A map, each thread of its script tight with the stark power of an imperial hand. The parchment he touched was fragile as cicada wings. Its color was the deep yellow of old bone, and the rivers inked upon it snaked in shapes not found on any other document Amir had seen. Across its face, names were written in broken Mongolian, Ulaanbaatar as Ulaanbaatar, known capitals relocated, rivers running in new directions. And at its bottom, marked with the dread seal of the Great Khan, was a boundary traced in crimson, encompassing not merely steppes and valleys, but cities sung only in legend and forests brushed by the rumor of snow leopards. His mentor, Bayan, approached him then, a stooped man with a mouth pruned by travel and eyes that shimmered with perpetual caution. Bayan's steps were measured, always pausing before the threshold of uncertainty. He had seen empires drawn and erased often enough to recognize the pulse of danger in curiosity. "Do you know what you hold?" Bayan's voice, low and edged, seemed to seep into the grain of the carpentered floor. He knelt beside Amir, careful not to crease the delicate parchment. "Not every map yearns to be found. Some are bones that belong undisturbed beneath the skin of the world. But these borders," Amir whispered, awe and fear twined like threads, "they are not what our ledgers say. The Great Khan's land it was. It is what the court remembers, Amir, that weighs. History bends to the needs of those who inherit its name. This ink," Bayan indicated the borders drawn by long-dead hands, "defies the stories the Khan's sons now tell the people. To possess it is to carry a blade sharpened on both edges." In the days that followed, rumor began to stir in the alleys of Karakoram. Whispers moved between merchants. An ancient map unearthed, one that could challenge the very shape of the empire's promise. The palace, in whose shadow Amir's house trembled, grew restless. Envoys arrived, draped in silks the color of storm-washed slate, and lingered too long at the corners of the cartographer's quarters. Each subtle question carried the weight of empire. At dusk, smoke rising from the court's hearth mingled with the persistent scent of rain. Amir lay awake, the map smoothed beneath his mattress, heart drumming with the fugitive's pace. Each contour on the parchment tugged at him, a riddle that unraveled not only lands, but the fragile truth of the past. He saw, in the quiet, the faces of vanished conquerors. He imagined their grief, the shifting of lines when war devoured certainty, the slow, private amnesia that accompanies the birth of legend. His choice swelled, to return the map to obscurity, bowing to the silent request of tradition, or to decipher it, risking the order that spun all of Karakoram's glory. He could not know if the truth, once freed from its yellowed skin, would bring dignity to his empire, or gnaw at the roots the Great Khan himself had driven into the world. But the shadows of knowledge once cast would not be drawn back. By dawn, Amir's resolve began to take shape, fragile as the first line inked on virgin parchment, yet aching towards its own revelation. Night fled Karakoram not with violence, but with the gentle retreat of certainty. The city inhaled the ghost-gray pre-dawn, every cobble and tent pole washed anew in hues of indigo and pearl, as merchants' banners fluttered listlessly against the slow-waking sky. Amir slipped from the warmth of his quarters. The map, tightly wound and bound against his chest, lent weight to his restless movements, a presence both thrilling and oppressive. He walked along the silent avenues, where the drone of human commerce had not yet banished memory's softer voices. Within the palace walls, the air was thick with vigilance. Rafters hung with fox pelts, and Persian lamps gleamed dully amidst the shadows, as if wary of abandoning secrets to the sunrise. Amir was summoned there by his mentor, Bayan, under the guise of discussing new commissions for the Khan's southern campaigns. In reality, each step deeper into the labyrinthine halls became a negotiation with his own fear. The faces he passed, courtiers painted with tranquil indifference, guards with fox-eyed glances, measured him in increments finer than coin, as though searching for the echo of forbidden knowledge. In this stronghold, rumor wandered like an unshod horse, quiet but ruinous. Bayan met Amir in an antechamber hung with scented reeds. He gestured for silence, his gaze sharp yet laced with a steadying compassion that had always distinguished his guidance from command. "Those who draw the lines are seldom those who obey them," he murmured, running a calloused finger along a faded tapestry of the great Khan atop a steaming stallion. Every cartographer who survived the last reign did so by learning that maps are mirrors, and mirrors are merciless. Amir pressed the map to his chest, feeling the pulse, his own or that of history. He could not say. "What if this truth serves to heal, not divide?" Bayan smiled, a line both mocking and mournful twisting his lips. Empires grew upon the flesh of contradiction. The Khan was lord of conquest and unifier, destroyer and maker. His markings were not meant to last. They are the pulse of ambition captured mid-beat. If you reveal a truth that offends the hunger of his heirs, will they thank you for restoring memory, or curse you for unweaving the story that binds their rule? Amir stood silent as Bayan departed, the question left hanging between them like a torn banner. The map burned against his heart. Khalkha Mongols, tribes from farthest Khorasan, Chinese envoys, all had sent representatives to Karakoram in recent months, each one watchful, as if the empire's center had become a fault line. From the edges of the world, envoys arrived with gifts: sandalwood, jade, Byzantine manuscripts. But their true gifts were questions, sharp as a splintered lance. Later, returning to the cramped cartographer's studio, Amir spread the forbidden map amid the ordered clutter of compasses, turning it toward panes of feeble light. It was not merely a charting of rivers and mountains, but a palimpsest. Beneath every stroke lay a previous intent, erased and replaced by some new hand. He saw the tremor of bitterness in borders expanded, and then contracted, learned to read the greater silences left, where names had been washed away entirely. Here, the empire did not swagger as in the courtly legends. It hesitated, then surged, then recoiled, as alive as any breathing creature. In imagination, Amir wandered these shifting dominions. He thought of scouts who had ridden to the world's ends, wind-scoured and starving, inscribing their memory into the bones of the land. He recalled the stories of Genghis himself, child of cold hunger, survivor of treachery. The great Khan, by whose law the map had first been inked, had seen more than the sweep of conquest. Beneath his gaze, Amir sensed a restless curiosity, an urge to know the lineaments of the world with ruthless clarity. It was this same clarity, dangerous as winter ice, that now beckoned him. Outside, the city clamored into daylight. The spell of secrecy wavered. An emissary from the imperial census appeared at Amir's threshold, expression poised, words clipped and courteous. The Khan's council grows anxious. Many speak of an ancient chart, a map that contradicts our annals. Do you know of such a thing? The man's eyes, clouded like a thawing river, offered neither threat nor comfort. Amir replied with practiced ignorance, though he saw, behind those eyes, the calculation that measured every possibility. The day wore on beneath the scrutiny of a restless empire. Amir realized that isolation was no longer possible. If the map's existence was known, then so too was the presence of its guardian. Each movement, the glance exchanged with Bayan, the hours bent over weathered vellum, now belonged not merely to himself, but to the theater of watching eyes. The empire's power was never in its soldiers alone, but in how it could turn attention into pressure, curiosity into peril. Yet that night, by a guttering lamp, Amir made his decision. He would trace the ancient borders faithfully, seeking the intentions that underpinned each inked line. In doing so, he would court the wrath of those for whom unity mattered more than truth. But perhaps, in the faint crackle of revelation, he would also hear the old Khan himself, whose real empire might always have been the restless desire to know, however fleetingly, the world's true shape. By the time the year's second equinox approached, Karakoram bore the pulse of something unsettled beneath its surface, like water stirring beneath brittle ice. News of famine flickered in from the western frontier. A new census demanded records of every pasture and well. Rumors tangled with omens, forming knots in the mind of every trader and scribe. As Amir worked, the sprawl of the ancient map began to weigh on him not as an artifact, but as a living challenge. To follow its contours meant to walk at history's flank, shadowed by all the lives whose footprints he reconstructed from faded ink. It was then that Bayan summoned Amir under the pretense of a commission far beyond the city. The royal retinue, it seemed, would ride south to the great Orkhon Valley, birthplace of countless dynasties and breaking ground for the spring migrations. Here, among the tent cities mushroomed along riverbanks and the sudden blooming of steppe grass, Amir's new duty emerged. The Khan's cartographers and officials, politicians, and shamans had gathered not simply to observe the order of herds, but to reaffirm the boundaries on which imperial peace depended. Ilkhanate scouts brushed past Chinese diplomats, their conversations swirling with measured rivalries. The old world met the new not as an embrace, but as a shifting overlap, lines redrawn upon animal skin, rites performed where markers had once been driven deep. Amir, his hand steadied by Bayan's wordless encouragement, carried his secret map beneath ordinary charts, moving among officials whose voices blended authority with unease. The very rivers whose courses he traced each day now glimmered at dusk with the light of hundreds of nomadic fires. One evening, Amir was drawn to the edge of camp by the ritual of separation, a procession where elders of each tribe offered up tokens to the land, feeding fragments of bone, millet, and colored string to the restless winds. In the firelight, the empire's story unfolded not through proclamation, but through gesture. A Kazakh herdsman's blessing, a Tangut elder's chant, Bayan's silent clasp of Amir's wrist. So much meaning, Amir realized, dwelled in what remained unsaid. These were the things never marked on any map, yet on which all borders rested. Between the tents, he encountered Altani, a scribe's daughter, whose voice carried the husky rhythm of river stones. She, too, sensed the restlessness of the land, all her life mapped within hasty walls and shifting alliances. They spoke in quiet currents, both having learned to listen for meaning before words. Amir confided in her, not the secret of the ancient map, but the ache of carrying knowledge that might awaken old hungers. In return, Altani shared stories of migrations past, whole tribes vanishing into fog, alliances sealed and broken under stars, histories left behind to be rewritten by survivors who dreamed only of an easier season. As days passed, the Orkhon Valley became not just a gathering place, but a crucible. Tensions shimmered beneath the rituals. A hot wind drove clouds of dust through the encampment, blurring the tents into visions, omen and memory indistinguishable. Amir saw, in scattered moments, counselors measuring one another with eyes sharp as falcons' beaks, children weaving in and out of gatherings, learning the grammar of empire with every stolen glance. The ancient map pressed against his back beneath layers of horsehair and felt, its presence a question he could neither voice nor quiet. In the haze of twilight, the valley became a mirror. Every campfire dancing upon the river reflected a world where boundaries were both everything and nothing. There came a night when the Khan himself descended to the valley, attended by a hush that stretched from tent to tent. The air changed as he passed, heavy with expectation, yet laced with the sweet breath of burned juniper. Amir glimpsed the ruler's broad face illuminated by torchlight, his silence more potent than the proclamations of lesser men. Bayan stood at Amir's side, face set with the gravity of one who has outlived too many rulers. The Khan's gaze, when it swept the gathering, seemed to weigh futures, yet unwritten as much as those charted by his ancestors. Later, alone among the sleeping camps, Amir studied the map once more. Between the fragile lines, the old empire's sweep expanded, the boundaries sometimes dissolving, sometimes crystallizing anew. It occurred to him that migration was not the exception, but the empire's very principle. Peoples, names, wholeness itself were waves, cresting and vanishing. The map exposed this truth in its erasures and layered traces. What tribe or city now claimed by one banner, tomorrow might flow seamlessly beneath another. Amir pressed his hand to the ancient parchment, feeling the ghosts of migrations, human and imagined, ripple beneath his palm. He saw shapes that no border would hold, memories meant not for parchment, but for the living world, renewed with each season's journey. As the Orkhon Valley braced for the coming thaw, Amir understood this. To possess such a map was not to wield power, but to shoulder a history too fluid for governance and too precious for absolute secrecy. In the drifting valley night, guided by fires burning from one end of empire to the other, Amir felt the slow dawning of his true purpose, not simply to record what was, but to be witness to what might always be in motion. Long after the camps along the Orkhon Valley dissolved into memory, Amir returned to Karakoram, the empire's stone heart. Spring had laid green filaments across the steppes, yet the capital greeted the returning delegation with winds that carried no warmth. It was a city poised on the fulcrum of forgetting and remembrance, its walls patched with centuries of conquest, its arteries choked anew with travelers and spies. The ceremonies had ended, but much lingered unresolved. Even the sun seemed reluctant to illuminate the fault lines that deepened behind closed doors. For Amir, the return was not a restoration of order, but the deepening of uncertainty. He hid the ancient map within a false compartment beneath his desk, aware now that secrecy was as much a language as the cartographer's cipher. Even Altani's presence in the city, her family now lodged at the scriptorium, cast new shadows. Laughter and conversation with her were fraught with the unspoken, and their words circled caution's edge. Yet, in the rare hours when Amir escaped the gaze of clerks and soldiers, he and Altani roamed the outlying ruins east of Karakoram, searching for respite among the stones. Here, the empire's memory was preserved not on parchment, but in rock. The Balbal stones raised as grave markers, dotted with crude faces, silent witnesses guarding the grasslands. Each carved monolith hinted at a lost ancestor, a forgotten war, an exodus unremembered by song or scroll. Amir knelt before one such stone, running his hands along the lichen-clad features, until the rough geometry yielded the impression of a frown, a jaw taut with warning. The Balbals, he mused, were a kind of map too, measuring the old flows of power and grief where ink could not reach. It was here Bayan joined them, his steps slower, attention sharpened by the weight of looming decisions. He motioned Amir aside, voice taut with realization. "They are searching more openly," Bayan said, meaning the palace's watchers. "Whoever holds the map is seen now both as traitor and as treasure. You must decide, will you trust the stone's silence, or hand your truth back to those who crave the power to redraw the world?" The question ached in Amir's chest. He thought often of the council, of the Khan's piercing, unreadable look when their eyes had met, in palace halls ornamented with Tibet jade and eagle feathers. Debate raged. Officials argued for updated borders to soothe unrest, while others whispered that too much revelation would shatter the fragile ties between disparate peoples. The fate of the empire's memory, like the map itself, now teetered in the flux of private ambitions and public fears. Within the scriptorium, where monks penned histories under the amber glow of whale oil, Amir found no peace. Requests came, requests to submit revised maps, to document pilgrim roads and new irrigation canals, to name and rename land as politics shifted. Each task was a rehearsal for greater betrayal or bravery, each line drawn, a rehearsal for erasure. He learned to trace without conviction, to bury his longing for honest lines in the neat efficiency demanded by court commissions. In rare moments, Altani and Amir pored over fragments of other maps, piecing together a quest for patterns that even politics could not erase. She shared with him a scrap of Persian legend, telling of a city lost when its stones had been inscribed, with all the secrets men should not know. Sometimes, she said, fingertips dusted with blue ink, the truth that saves one era can ruin the next. What kind of cartographer are you, Amir, chronicler, prophet, or keeper of silence? Outside, a hush grew within the city. Spies wove themselves through the crowds, more persistent than spring's wind, and Amir felt the unseen boundary between secrecy and revelation closing around him. The ancient map, though hidden, murmured in his thoughts, a chorus of riverbeds, hunting trails, vanished settlements, and renewed hope. Its borders shifted every time he dreamed, no longer fixed lines, but rippling possibilities judging his every impulse. One morning, a summons, formal, branded with the Khan's seal, arrived for Amir. He was to present himself in the stone audience chamber, walls cold and lightless, where history's echoes crashed in upon themselves, and decisions once made left stains deeper than any pigment. He entered not as a mapmaker, but as a vessel of dilemma, the secret of the land's true shape burning in his memory. At the chamber's heart, the Khan and his council waited, measured in their stillness. The future of the empire stretched invisible between their silent breaths. Amir knelt. His mind dwelled on the bauble stones outside the city, patient among the grasses, reminders that the act of recording is as fraught as the act of forgetting, and that sometimes the only wisdom is to let stone keep the secrets ink cannot hold. They say the imperial audience chamber absorbs more secrets than even the steppe can bury. In its mute expanse of stone, where banners hung perpetually at half-light and the air tasted of old resin and iron, time stretched thin, every echo threatening to become final. Amir stood in the focus of that great hush, girded by the council's expectant eyes and the undulating shadows of history itself. His hands fidgeted at his sides, palms scorched by invisible ink, as he weighed the fate of the map against the brittle silence gathering within the room. The Khan at last spoke, his tone low and measured as a winter river. There is a legend in every border, Amir. Those who redraw unmake old vows. Those who conceal hold fire under linen. What brings you here? Amir's reply was neither confession nor defiance. I am only a servant of the land's memory, he said, his voice thinned by sleepless nights and hope's rough splinters. He felt both seen and vanishing, as if he and the ancient parchment were two layers the world longed to separate and press back together. Debate flowed around him, careful as a ceremonial dance, advisors suggesting managed revisions, others cautioning against stirring ancient grievances. No voice could command certainty. Each word mirrored the empire's own shifting logic, at once bold and brittle. Through it all, the Khan watched Amir, weighing not just the fate of a map, but the trembling faith of a generation raised on sanctioned myth. Yet it was Bayan's intervention that shifted the current. The old cartographer, face drawn by years and witness, spoke softly. What is kept hidden survives, but only as rumor. What is revealed might fracture, but truth unspoken is soil unwatered. Your empire is as wide as its memory, no more, no less. After a silence that crept through stone like frost, the Khan gestured for Amir to rise. You have been the map's keeper. Now you must become its interpreter, not for power, but for understanding. Dismissed from the chamber, Amir walked through a city clouded by uncertainty. Rumor thickened in every alley. Some suspected his secret, others remained blind. As dusk pressed against the rooftops, he found Altani in the half-lit scriptorium, her eyes rimmed with wakefulness. They spoke little. Theirs was a communion formed in the cadence of shared burden. Between them, the map again unrolled, its lines not just a history of conquests, but an invitation, a question that asked what might be possible if memory could be tended rather than contested. In the days that followed, Amir was granted a curious latitude. The council required new maps, ones that balanced the hard lines of political certainty with the fertile vagueness of memory and myth. He spent long hours working beside Altani and Bayan, drawing borders made softer by footpaths, by rivers that had wandered before nations ever claimed them. Sometimes he would inscribe a village lost to time, a pasture that belonged to no one, a forgotten pilgrimage route, layering the parchment with truths too gentle to disrupt, but too vital to conceal. Yet not all received this new cartography with grace. Dissent rose from corners both expected and strange. Envoys who feared the return of ancient claims, generals who saw in ambiguity only threat. Spies watched the scriptorium without pretense. Altani's family lived under quiet suspicion. Bayan's name was whispered with respect and unease. Still, Amir persisted. Each map produced became more than a tool. It was a conversation with the future, an invitation to remember complexity instead of imposing order. Often, at dusk, Amir would leave the city's clamor and walk toward the outer meadows. The mountains on the horizon glimmered in the blue hour, silhouettes wavering between the possible and the remembered. Here, he carried with him scraps of parchment and a single stone from the Orkhan Valley, finding solace in the act of tracing the line where earth met sky. He pondered, not for the first time, what other truths might still wait beneath cloud shadow, what knowledge past cartographers had let vanish, so the empire's dream could endure a little longer. As seasons shifted, Karakoram settled into a new rhythm, uneasy, watchful, yet admitting a little more breadth to its self-understanding. Amir, grown quieter but never diminished, became a figure both of legend and of gentle caution. The last map, though never presented in full, lived on in the lines of every document he touched, truth stitched not as a boundary, but as possibility. In time, a new generation of mapmakers gathered around him, drawn less for his skill than for the trust he placed in silence and honest curiosity. He taught them what Bayan had taught him. A map is judgment and mercy entwined, its real measure not the reach of empire, but its willingness to recall the world's restless heart. High above Karakoram, where the wind combed the grasslands and the earth remembered migrations older than history, the stone baubles endured, witnesses and warnings, rough faces lifted toward the same endless horizon, and among them, the last cartographer's legacy grew, not in the charts approved by courts, but in the fragile balance he struck between what must be told and what wisdom asks us to let drift quietly beyond the edge of the known.